Robert Hendricks adjusted his expensive watch and glanced around the modest family restaurant with barely concealed distaste. The place was far from his usual dining spots, no white tablecloths, no sommelier, just simple wooden tables and the smell of home-cooked food. He wouldn't have chosen to eat here, but his wife had insisted they try something different for their son's birthday dinner. His 12-year-old son Michael sat beside him, rocking slightly in his chair while staring intently at the patterns in the wood grain of the table. Michael had been diagnosed with autism when he was 3, and Robert had spent nearly a decade trying to find the right treatments, the best therapists, and the most prestigious special schools. Nothing seemed to break through to his son the way he hoped. "Michael, sit still," Robert whispered, embarrassed as other diners occasionally glanced their way. He had built a financial empire worth millions, commanded respect in boardrooms across the country, but he felt helpless when it came to connecting with his own child. The restaurant was busy for a Tuesday evening, filled with working-class families enjoying affordable meals together. Robert noticed how easily the other children chattered with their parents, something that seemed impossible in his own family despite all the money he'd spent on specialists. A young black woman approached their table with a warm smile, her notepad ready. She appeared to be in her early 20s, with kind eyes and braided hair pulled back neatly. Her name tag read, "Jasmine. Good evening. Welcome to Mama's Kitchen. I'm Jasmine, and I'll be taking care of you tonight," she said cheerfully, her voice carrying a musical quality that made even Robert look up from his phone. Michael's rocking stopped abruptly. He lifted his head and stared directly at Jasmine, something he rarely did with strangers. Robert was surprised but also worried. His son's unpredictable behaviors in public often led to uncomfortable situations. "What can I start you folks with tonight?" Jasmine continued, seemingly unfazed by Michael's intense stare. Robert cleared his throat. "We'll need a few minutes to look over the menu. And please, if my son does anything unusual, just ignore it. He has special needs." Jasmine's expression softened, but not with pity. Instead, she looked at Michael with genuine interest. "That's perfectly fine, sir. Take all the time you need." As she turned to leave, Michael suddenly spoke his first word since entering the restaurant. "Music," he said quietly, still looking at Jasmine. She stopped and turned back, crouching down to Michael's eye level. "You like music?" Michael nodded, his eyes brightening in a way Robert hadn't seen in months. "Violin," he whispered. "You play violin?" Jasmine asked, her face lighting up with excitement. Michael shook his head but pointed at her. Jasmine looked confused for a moment. Then, understanding dawned on her face. "Oh, you can tell I play violin?" Robert frowned. How could his son possibly know that about a complete stranger? "I'm sorry. He sometimes says random things. There's no way he could know." "Actually," Jasmine interrupted gently, "he's absolutely right. I do play violin. I have been since I was 5 years old." She looked back at Michael with amazement. "How did you know?" Michael pointed at her hands, then made a small motion as if holding a bow. "Calluses," he said softly. "Left fingers. Right hand bow hold." Robert stared at his son in shock. Michael had never been so observant or articulate about details with a stranger before. How had he noticed something so specific? Jasmine examined her hands and laughed with delight. "You're absolutely right. I do have calluses from years of practice. And my right hand does curve a little differently from holding the bow. You have incredible observation skills." For the first time in years, Robert saw his son smile, really smile, at someone other than immediate family. Michael's whole demeanor changed, his body relaxing as he continued to focus on Jasmine. "I practice every morning before my shift," Jasmine continued, still crouched at Michael's level. "I'm saving up to audition for music school. Do you like to listen to violin music?" Michael nodded eagerly. "Bach. Partita. Number 2. Jasmine's eyes widened. "The Partita number 2 in D minor? That's one of the most challenging pieces. You have excellent taste." Robert felt completely out of his depth. He had never heard Michael speak so clearly about his interests with anyone, let alone a stranger. The expensive music therapists he'd hired had never managed to engage his son like this young waitress was doing so effortlessly. "What's your favorite movement?" Jasmine asked, settling into the conversation naturally. "Chaconne," Michael replied without hesitation, his voice growing stronger with each word. "Oh my goodness, yes. The chaconne is absolutely beautiful, but it's so difficult. I've been working on it for months," Jasmine said, her enthusiasm genuine. "It takes about 15 minutes to play the whole thing, and it tells such an incredible story without any words." Michael's rocking had completely stopped. He was sitting still, making eye contact, and engaging in the longest conversation Robert had witnessed in months. Other families in the restaurant had noticed the unusual interaction, but instead of staring with judgment, many were smiling at the sweet exchange. Robert found himself studying Jasmine more carefully. Despite his initial assumptions about her, a young woman working in a modest restaurant, she clearly had sophisticated musical knowledge and was connecting with his son in a way that highly paid professionals had failed to achieve. Would you mind if I brought my violin next time I work and played a little for Michael?" Jasmine asked, looking at Robert for permission. "I mean, if that would be okay with you, sir. I finish my shifts around 8, and sometimes the owner lets me stay after hours if I help clean up." Robert hesitated. His instinct was to say no to protect his son from disappointment if this young woman didn't follow through, or from getting too attached to someone outside their carefully controlled world. But seeing the hope in Michael's eyes, he found himself nodding. That would be very kind of you," he said quietly. "Wonderful," Jasmine exclaimed, standing up. "I'll bring it Thursday evening if you can come back then. Now, have you had a chance to look at the menu?" For the rest of the meal, Michael kept glancing toward the kitchen, clearly hoping to catch another glimpse of Jasmine. He ate more than usual and didn't have any of his typical meltdowns when the restaurant got noisy. When Jasmine brought their check, she had drawn a small treble clef on the receipt next to a smiley face. "See you Thursday, Michael," she said warmly. "Thursday," Michael repeated, looking directly at her again. As they drove home in Robert's luxury car, Michael stared out the window instead of focusing on his usual repetitive behaviors. Robert found himself thinking about the evening, trying to understand what had just happened. "Dad," Michael said suddenly from the back seat. Another surprise. Since he rarely initiated conversation. "Yes, son. Jasmine is nice." Robert looked at his son in the rearview mirror. Michael's expression was peaceful, content in a way that Robert couldn't remember seeing before. "Yes," he agreed quietly. "She is." That night, as Robert tucked Michael into bed, his son looked up at him with clear, focused eyes. We go Thursday?" "Yes, Michael. We'll go Thursday." After Michael fell asleep, Robert sat in his home office, staring at the business reports on his desk, but unable to concentrate. He thought about the young waitress who had somehow reached his son in a matter of minutes, something Robert had been trying to do for years despite all his resources and connections. He realized he knew nothing about her story, her background, or her dreams beyond the brief mention of music school. For someone who prided himself on reading people in business situations, he had made instant assumptions about Jasmine that were clearly incomplete. Robert had built his wealth by being careful, calculated, and maintaining control over every situation. But watching his son connect with Jasmine had reminded him that some of the most important things in life couldn't be bought or controlled. They happened naturally, unexpectedly, through simple human kindness and understanding. As he finally headed to bed, Robert found himself looking forward to Thursday evening, curious to see what would happen when Jasmine brought her violin. For the first time in years, he felt a spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, someone had found a key to unlock the world his son lived in. The expensive music therapy sessions, the specialized equipment, the carefully structured activities, none of it had created the genuine joy he'd seen in Michael's eyes tonight. A young woman with a violin and a kind heart had accomplished in one evening what months of professional intervention had not. Robert drifted off to sleep, wondering what else he might have missed by focusing so much on credentials and cost instead of simply paying attention to who his son really was and what truly made him happy. Thursday evening couldn't come fast enough for Michael. He had mentioned Jasmine and her violin every day since their first meeting, something that both amazed and concerned Robert. His son rarely showed such sustained interest in anything, especially involving other people. Robert had spent the week thinking about the upcoming visit more than he cared to admit. He'd even done something completely out of character. He'd researched Bach's Partita No. 2 online, listening to recordings and reading about its complexity. He wanted to understand what had captured his son's attention so completely. When they arrived at Mama's kitchen Thursday evening, Michael was practically vibrating with excitement. He walked directly to the same table they'd occupied before and sat down, his eyes scanning the restaurant for Jasmine. She might be busy with other customers, Robert warned gently, not wanting his son to be disappointed, but Jasmine appeared within minutes, carrying her violin case along with her order pad. Her face broke into a huge smile when she saw them. "You came back. I was hoping you would." "Violin?" Michael asked immediately, pointing at the case. "Right here," Jasmine confirmed, patting the case. "But first, let me take your dinner order. And then after I finish my shift, we can have some music time. Is that okay?" Michael nodded eagerly and, to Robert's amazement, sat perfectly still through the entire meal. He even tried foods he'd never shown interest in before, eating everything on his plate without any of his usual texture complaints. Other customers began to notice the young woman with the violin case, and word spread quietly through the restaurant that there would be a small performance later. Instead of the private moment Robert had anticipated, it was becoming a public event. "Maybe we should do this another time," Robert suggested quietly when Jasmine came to clear their plates. "It looks like you're going to have an audience." "Oh, that's wonderful," Jasmine replied, surprising him. "Music is meant to be shared. Michael won't mind, will you?" Michael shook his head vigorously. "Play now? Just a few more minutes," Jasmine promised. "I need to finish cleaning up, and then we'll have our concert." As Jasmine worked, Robert noticed how she moved through the restaurant. She knew every customer's name, asked about their families, and treated everyone with the same warmth she'd shown Michael. The elderly man in the corner booth lit up when she refilled his coffee. The young mother, struggling with 3 small children, relaxed when Jasmine offered to warm up the baby's bottle. "She's something special, isn't she?" said a voice behind Robert. He turned to see an older black man he recognized as the restaurant owner, based on how he moved through the space with authority and familiarity. "I'm Marcus Williams. This is my place," the man said, extending his hand. "You're Michael's father, right? Jasmine told me about your boy's love for violin music." Robert shook his hand, feeling slightly uncomfortable with the familiarity but impressed by the firm handshake and direct eye contact. "Robert Hendricks. Yes, Michael is. He's very interested in music. That girl has been working for me for 2 years, putting herself through community college while saving every penny for music school," Marcus continued, watching Jasmine as she finished wiping down tables. "Never seen anyone work harder or treat people kinder. She's got a gift, both with music and with people." Robert found himself curious despite his usual reservations about getting personally involved with service workers. "Music school is expensive," he said carefully. "Tell me about it," Marcus laughed. "She's applying to the conservatory downtown. But even with scholarships, it's more money than most folks like us see in a lifetime. Still, if anyone deserves a shot at their dreams, it's that girl." Before Robert could respond, Jasmine approached with her violin case, having changed out of her work apron. "Ready for some music?" The remaining customers in the restaurant, about 15 people, had gathered around, creating an impromptu audience. Michael stood up immediately and moved closer to where Jasmine was setting up. "What would you like to hear first, Michael?" she asked, tuning her instrument with practiced efficiency. "Chaconne," he said without hesitation. "The whole thing? That's a long piece. Are you sure you want to sit still for 15 minutes? Michael nodded seriously. "All of it." Robert had never seen his son commit to sitting still for 15 minutes for anything, but he watched in amazement as Michael found a spot on the floor directly in front of Jasmine and settled into a comfortable position. Jasmine raised her violin and drew the bow across the strings. The first notes of Bach's Chaconne filled the small restaurant, and the effect was immediate and profound. The complex, haunting melody seemed to transform the humble space into something sacred. Michael's response was unlike anything Robert had ever witnessed. His son's usual fidgeting and restlessness completely disappeared. His breathing slowed, his eyes closed, and his face took on an expression of pure peace and joy. It was as if the music was speaking directly to something deep inside him, but Michael wasn't the only one affected. The entire restaurant fell silent, captivated by Jasmine's skill and the beauty of the music. Robert found himself holding his breath during some of the more delicate passages, amazed that someone so young could handle such a technically demanding piece with apparent ease. Halfway through the piece, something extraordinary happened. Michael began to move, not his usual repetitive rocking, but small, graceful movements that seemed to follow the rhythm and emotion of the music. His hands moved as if he were conducting an invisible orchestra, his fingers dancing through the air in perfect time with Jasmine's bowing. Other people in the restaurant noticed too. The young mother's crying baby had quieted completely. The elderly man was wiping tears from his eyes. Even the teenagers who had been looking at their phones were now completely focused on the performance. When Jasmine reached the final notes, allowing them to hang in the air before slowly lowering her instrument, the silence that followed was profound. Then the applause began, enthusiastic but respectful, as if everyone understood they had witnessed something special. Michael opened his eyes and looked directly at Jasmine with an expression Robert had never seen before, pure admiration and connection. "That was beautiful," Michael said clearly, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Thank you. Thank you for listening so perfectly," Jasmine replied, kneeling down to his level again. "I've never had a more attentive audience." "Can you teach me?" Michael asked, surprising everyone, especially Robert. The words hung in the air. Robert's first instinct was to explain that Michael had tried piano lessons before with little success, that learning violin was probably too difficult, that they should be realistic about expectations. But before he could speak, Jasmine's face lit up with excitement. "I would love to. Have you ever held a violin before?" Michael shook his head, but he was reaching out toward her instrument with careful, reverent hands. "Here," Jasmine said, showing him how to hold the violin properly. "Feel how light it is? And listen." She plucked the strings gently, letting Michael hear each note. Under her guidance, Michael held the violin with surprising naturalness. His fingers found the strings, and although he couldn't produce clear notes yet, his touch was gentle and purposeful. "He's got good instincts," Jasmine observed. "Look how he's holding his left hand. That's not easy for beginners." Robert watched this interaction with growing amazement and a dawning sense of possibility he hadn't felt in years, but he also felt the weight of reality. "Jasmine, that's very kind of you to offer. But private violin lessons are quite expensive, and Michael has some challenges that might make it difficult." "I don't want payment," Jasmine interrupted firmly. "If Michael wants to learn, and you're okay with it, I'd be honored to teach him. I teach a few kids in my neighborhood anyway. Music should be available to everyone who wants it." Robert was taken aback. In his world, everything came with a price tag, especially quality services. The idea that someone would offer their expertise freely was foreign to him. "That's very generous," he said slowly, "but I couldn't ask you to donate your time like that. If you're serious about teaching him, I would insist on paying your regular rate." "I don't have a regular rate for teaching kids like Michael," Jasmine replied with a gentle smile. "Some things aren't about money. They're about sharing what you love with people who might love it too." Marcus, who had been watching the whole exchange, chimed in. "Why don't you folks work out the details? Jasmine, you could use the back room here after hours if you want a quiet place for lessons." Michael was still holding the violin, his fingers exploring the strings with growing confidence. "When?" he asked, looking between Jasmine and his father. Robert felt pulled between his natural caution and the clear desire in his son's eyes. "Michael, learning violin takes a lot of practice and patience. Are you sure you want to try?" "Yes," Michael said with more conviction than Robert had heard from him about anything. "Okay," Robert heard himself saying. "We can try a few lessons and see how it goes." The smile that spread across Michael's face was worth more than any business deal Robert had ever closed. Jasmine's expression was equally bright. and even the other customers were smiling at the heartwarming scene. "How about Sunday afternoons?" Jasmine suggested. "I don't work Sundays, so we could have a nice, quiet lesson time." "Sunday," Michael agreed immediately. As they prepared to leave, Robert pulled Jasmine aside. "I want you to know, I recognize what a gift you're offering. If you change your mind about payment—" "Mr. Hendricks," Jasmine interrupted gently, "I've never seen a child respond to music the way Michael does. Teaching him isn't a favor to you. It's a privilege for me." Walking to the car, Michael was more animated than Robert had seen him in months. He hummed fragments of the chaconne and moved his fingers as if practicing violin positions. "Dad?" Michael said as they drove home. "Yes? I want to learn violin. Really learn." "I know, son. We'll see how it goes." But in his heart, Robert was already starting to believe that this unexpected friendship with a young waitress, who happened to be a gifted musician, might be exactly what his son needed. For the first time in years, he felt hopeful about Michael's future, not because of money spent or experts consulted, but because of the simple generosity of someone who saw the music inside his child and was willing to help bring it out. 6 weeks later, Robert sat in his car outside Mama's kitchen, watching through the window as Jasmine worked with Michael on his violin posture. Their Sunday lessons had become the highlight of Michael's week, and if Robert was honest with himself, he looked forward to them almost as much as his son did. The changes in Michael had been remarkable. Not only was he learning to play simple melodies, but his overall communication had improved dramatically. He spoke more clearly, made eye contact more often, and seemed more engaged with the world around him. His regular therapists were amazed by his progress, but the changes hadn't been limited to Michael. Robert found himself thinking differently about many things he'd previously taken for granted. Jasmine's quiet dignity, her dedication to her craft, and her natural ability to connect with people had challenged many of his assumptions about success and worth. "Robert, you're early today," Marcus called out as he entered the restaurant. "They've still got 10 minutes left." Robert had gotten into the habit of arriving early and chatting with Marcus while waiting for the lesson to end. He'd learned that Marcus was a former music teacher himself, who had opened the restaurant after budget cuts eliminated his job. Like Jasmine, he was someone whose value couldn't be measured by conventional standards. "How's our boy doing today?" Marcus asked, settling into the booth next to Robert. "See for yourself," Robert replied, nodding toward the back room, where Michael was carefully playing a simple version of "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star." The notes were clear and steady, showing the careful practice he'd been doing at home. "That's progress," Marcus observed. "Jasmine says he's got natural musical instincts. Some kids take months to get that level of bow control." Robert watched his son's concentrated face, remembering how fidgety and unfocused Michael used to be. Now he could sit still for 30-minute lessons, following complex instructions and showing patience Robert had never seen before. "Marcus, can I ask you something?" Robert said, keeping his voice low. "Sure thing. Jasmine mentioned she's applied to music school, but she hasn't talked about it much lately. How are her applications going?" Marcus's expression grew serious. "She got accepted to the conservatory downtown. Full scholarship for tuition too, which was a miracle. But she still needs money for housing, books, instruments, and living expenses. She's been working extra shifts trying to save up, but it's not enough." Robert felt a tightness in his chest. "When does she need to give them an answer?" Quote, "Next week. If she can't come up with the money, she'll have to defer for another year. Maybe longer." Robert stared at his hands, thinking about the expensive watch on his wrist that cost more than Jasmine probably made in 6 months. "What kind of money are we talking about?" "About $15,000 for the first year, after the scholarship. I know it doesn't sound like much to someone like you, but for folks like us." Marcus shrugged sadly. $15,000. Robert spent more than that on his annual country club membership, money he never even thought about. But for Jasmine, it was the difference between achieving her dreams and watching them slip away. "Has she told Michael about this?" Robert asked. "No way. That girl wouldn't burden a child with her problems. She's been acting like everything is fine, even though I can see the stress wearing on her." Through the window into the back room, Robert watched Jasmine patiently adjust Michael's hand position, her face glowing with pride as he successfully played a difficult passage. She had given his son something precious: confidence, joy, and a new way to express himself. The idea that her own dreams might be cut short because of money felt wrong in a way that surprised him. "The lesson's ending," Marcus observed. "You might want to head back there." Robert found Michael carefully placing his small violin back in its case, treating the instrument with the same reverence he'd shown from the first day. "How did it go today?" Robert asked. "Dad, listen," Michael exclaimed, picking up his violin again. He played a simple melody, but each note was clear and purposeful. "Jasmine taught me this song. It's called Amazing Grace." Robert listened to his son play, noting not just the music but the confidence in Michael's posture, the way he looked up to make sure his father was listening, the pride in his accomplishment. These were behaviors that had seemed impossible just 2 months ago. "That's beautiful, Michael," Robert said genuinely. "Next week we start working on a harder song," Michael continued excitedly. "Jasmine says I'm ready for something with 2 different strings." Jasmine was packing up her own violin, but Robert noticed her movements seemed slower, less enthusiastic than usual. The stress Marcus had mentioned was subtle but visible now that Robert was looking for it. "Jasmine, could I speak with you privately for a moment?" Robert asked. She looked surprised but nodded. "Michael, why don't you practice that finger position we worked on while your dad and I talk?" They stepped into the main dining area, where a few late customers were finishing their meals. "I understand congratulations are in order," Robert began. "Marcus mentioned you were accepted to the conservatory." Jasmine's smile was forced. "Yes, it's wonderful news. A dream come true. You don't sound entirely happy about it." She looked down at her hands, the same hands Michael had noticed that first night, marked by years of dedicated practice. "It's complicated. Getting in was the goal for so long. I guess I didn't think enough about what came after." Robert waited, sensing there was more she wanted to say. "The truth is, I don't know if I can afford to go," Jasmine continued quietly. "I've been working every shift I can get, saving every penny, but it's not enough. I might need to defer and try again next year." "What if you had the money?" Robert asked directly. "Would you want to go?" "Of course," Jasmine replied immediately. "It's everything I've worked for. But wanting something and being able to achieve it are different things." Robert took a deep breath. "What if someone wanted to help make it possible?" Jasmine looked at him with confusion. "I don't understand." "Michael has changed completely since he started working with you," Robert explained. "He's happier, more communicative, more confident. You've given him something I spent years trying to buy from professionals. You've given him a connection to music and to himself that has transformed our whole family." "I love teaching Michael," Jasmine said softly. "Watching him discover music has been one of the best parts of my week." "Then let me give you something in return," Robert said. "Let me pay for your school expenses. Consider it an investment in someone who has already proven what a difference they can make in a child's life." Jasmine stared at him in shock. "Mr. Hendricks, I can't accept that kind of money. It wouldn't be right." "Why wouldn't it be right?" Because I haven't done anything to earn it. I taught Michael because I wanted to, not because I expected anything back." Robert smiled, understanding now what Marcus had meant about Jasmine's character. "That's exactly why you deserve it. You've shown my son that music can be a bridge to connection, that learning can be joyful, that kindness doesn't require payment. Those aren't small things, they're everything." "But $15,000 is less than I spent on Michael's last round of specialists," Robert interrupted. "Money that didn't help him at all. This is money that would support someone who has already proven they can make a real difference." Jasmine was quiet for a long moment, tears forming in her eyes. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll accept the help and continue sharing your gift with others, like Michael." Before Jasmine could respond, Michael appeared in the doorway. "Dad? Are you coming? I want to play the song again." "In a minute, son," Robert replied. But Michael had noticed Jasmine's emotional expression. With the intuition that had surprised Robert so many times, Michael walked over to Jasmine and gently took her hand. "Are you sad?" he asked directly. Jasmine knelt down to his level, wiping her eyes. "No, Michael. I'm not sad. I'm very, very happy." "Good," Michael said simply. "Music should make people happy." "You're absolutely right," Jasmine agreed, her voice thick with emotion. Over the following week, Robert helped Jasmine navigate the financial arrangements for school. He insisted on setting up the payment as a formal scholarship through his company's foundation, making it official and removing any sense of personal obligation. The night before Jasmine was scheduled to start at the conservatory, she organized a small farewell concert at Mama's Kitchen. The entire restaurant was packed with customers who had become friends, neighbors who had heard about the young woman who was pursuing her dreams, and of course, Michael and Robert. Jasmine played several pieces, including the chaconne that had first connected her with Michael. But the highlight of the evening came when she invited Michael to join her for a simple duet. Father and son had practiced together during the week, and while Michael's part was basic, he played it with confidence and joy. Watching his son perform in front of a room full of people, something that would have been unthinkable months earlier, Robert felt overwhelmed with gratitude, not just for Jasmine's musical instruction, but for her demonstration that the most important things in life couldn't be bought. They had to be freely given and received. After the concert, as people were saying their goodbyes, Michael approached Jasmine with something in his hands. "This is for you," he said, offering her a small, wrapped package. Inside was a simple bracelet made of wooden beads, each one carved with a different musical note. Michael had made it himself during his art therapy sessions, working for weeks to get each note exactly right. "So you remember our music time," Michael explained. Jasmine put the bracelet on immediately, tears streaming down her face. "I will treasure this always, Michael. And I will never forget what music brought us together." "Will you visit?" Michael asked. "Of course I will. And you have to keep practicing, because when I come back, I want to hear how much you've improved." 6 months later, Robert received a letter from Jasmine. She was thriving in music school. Her professors were impressed with her talent and dedication, and she was already planning to specialize in music therapy, inspired by her experience with Michael. But more importantly, she had enclosed a recording, a piece she had composed herself, titled Michael's Song. It was a beautiful, simple melody that captured something essential about discovery, growth, and the unexpected connections that could transform lives. Michael listened to the recording every night before bed, and it never failed to bring the same peaceful expression to his face that Robert had first noticed that evening in Mama's Kitchen. Robert had learned something valuable through their relationship with Jasmine, that real wealth wasn't measured in bank accounts or stock portfolios, but in the ability to recognize and nurture the gifts that surrounded you every day. A young waitress with a violin had taught his son to make music, but she had taught Robert something even more important: that the most meaningful investments were in people, and that the best returns came not from what you could gain, but from what you could give. Michael continued his violin lessons with a new teacher Jasmine had recommended. But every few months, when she came home to visit, she would spend an afternoon at Mama's Kitchen playing music with the boy who had seen something special in her from the very first day they met. And Robert learned to see it too.